Mr. James Joyce III.
All right now. Brother Gene, I appreciate that. Good morning and a pleasure to be with you here this morning.
Morning.
Wow. Before we get started, Gabriela Rodriguez, I see you back there. I know you didn't get your shout out. City Council member, newly elected back there.
I didn't see it come in.
Teamwork makes the dream work.
All right now.
Thank you, Brother Burse, for that warm introduction, the MLK committee, for the invitation to serve as the keynote speaker today, to the gracious sponsors, supporters, and most of all, you, our community. It is an absolute pleasure to be before you this historic morning. Heavy, if I'm being honest,
Yes.
but a pleasure and honor nonetheless. I mean, I've got a speech prepared today, but really, what are we doing?
Talk to us, brother. Talk to us. Woo!
I've got to address the elephant in the room. Shout out to the Deltas, respectfully. The uncertainty and fear that many of us are feeling is real. It's valid. Fears associated with citizenship status, basic health rights being threatened, the ratcheting up of divisive rhetoric, it's all valid. But please allow me, if you will, let us breathe.
Yes.
Let us acknowledge our feelings, the pain, the grief, the despair, the joy, whatever it is, and then let us breathe again. March on till victory is won. All righty, thank you. I gotta go catch a one-way flight to some undisclosed country in Africa. That would be nice, but that's not reality. I'm not going anywhere. Realistically looking at it though, I believe that we'd be best served to approach things moving forward with a dose of measured reality and some levity while breathing along the way. And if marching is your thing, indeed march on. There is a role for that. But that is not for me, and that's not what I'm here to offer you today. If you will allow, what I will offer today is more along the lines best summarized in a quote from a renowned thought leader and Atlanta native, Michael Render, who also happens to be a Grammy Award-winning musician by the name of Killer Mike. He once said, "Now is the time to plot, plan, strategize, organize, and mobilize."
Yes.
And as we dive into some context and what that might look like for our community, I'd like to clarify some terminology and framing that I'll be using here today first. Take note, the name is Coffee with a Black Guy, not Coffee with an African American guy. That's not only for brevity purposes, rather it aligns with my principled preference to use Black over African American as it is more inclusive.
All right now.
African American, to me, excludes some of my Afro-Latino brothers and sisters, our Caribbean brothers and sisters, as well as other parts of the diaspora.
All right.
Black is also more inclusive of our multiracial brothers and sisters who are Black, such as Malcolm X, Bob Marley, J. Cole, Barack Obama, Kamala Harris. Notice I didn't mention Drake. Something never did sit quite well with me. But I digress. All of the aforementioned are multiracial black folks, key to the advancement and progress of the whole. Also, it is black power, not African American power. And I believe back to our power is where we deserve to be for the betterment of our entire community.
Yes, black power. Educate me.
Another point, just like my diversity consulting work, today's offering comes from the perspective of a black man.
Right now.
And let me expound upon that a little bit. For this context, that means that my thoughts don't come from a place of respectability or fitting in. Rather, an unapologetic blackness that is rooted in an understanding, respect, and celebration of what that means and how that can benefit the whole. We're used to a Eurocentric perspective on things, or perhaps an Eastern Asian, or even an indigenous perspective. This is none of that. It is my belief that there is a certain instructional universality to the Black American experience, which is culturally rich and did not start with enslavement. Finally, in my terminologies here, I'll reference the Reconstruction period, which is technically that 12-year period between 1865 and 1877, but I may include the years extending all the way up to the Red Summer of 1919 and into 1920, just to clarify. And now that we got that out the way and are on the same page about these things, I believe that we are poised to have an opportunity before us. A difficult and challenging opportunity, but a grand one nonetheless. I believe that opportunity could be sort of a new Reconstruction period for America. A reconstruction, if you will. Not to summons Rihanna, but I hear we're still waiting on an album from that sister somewhere. As I see it, at no point in our democracy has this great experiment of democracy been this close to actually breaking. Let me explain a little bit about what I mean. In my neighborhood growing up, during my teen years, we had a neighborhood bike. It was a BMX bike that had like this plastic yellow dirt bike frame on it. It was the true definition of community property. One person would ride it from one end of town to the other, leave it in the front yard, and then when the next person needed it, they'd ask around, where's the bike? Find it, and they'd hop on it and go on to their destination. If a group of us were riding, inevitably, there would be one without a bike. Go grab the hoopty bike, let's ride. If it would break or a bolt came loose, one of us would fix it. I took particular pride in that. That hoopty bike lasted for about 2 summers, if memory serves me correctly. But at some point, it was like, this thing is on its last leg and could just break at any point. With that in mind, we didn't want the husky kid to hop on the bike. That's kind of how I feel about our democracy right now. American democracy could actually break within the next 4 years. And for me, our new old president is that husky kid that you don't want to hop on the bike of democracy. I hope it'll hold up, but know that more than likely it'll break. Arguably, the great experiment began with the Declaration of Independence, whose principal author, the enslaver Thomas Jefferson, penned the preamble, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." 13 words into the foundational document into this experiment, and we are already at a clear hypocrisy. Flawed from the foundation. Now let me be clear, my publicly pointing this blatant hypocrisy out in our democracy doesn't make me anti-American. It doesn't make me a communist if people still get accused of that. It's not a seditious act. My point in pointing out this hypocrisy that is rooted in the first 13 words of the preamble to the Declaration of Independence is simply using critical thinking about something that is a historical fact. Or so I've been advised to say by my attorney. But all jokes aside, this is the kind of thought process, simply one of critical thought, that will be required if we are to rebuild this thing that very likely may break. Now, what might a broken democracy look like? Well, I have some thoughts about that, but I thought, that'd be a great question for ChatGPT. Turns out, that is not a great question for ChatGPT. It painted a picture, to be frank, seemed to put us more than halfway at a broken democracy already. The breakdown of American democracy would likely be a gradual and multifaceted process driven by a combination of political, social, and institutional failures. This increasingly powerful AI bot continued to lay out pretty close to what I had been thinking that a broken democracy might look like. Institutional erosion, undermining of checks and balances, weakening the rule of law, elections becoming meaningless. I was thinking of divestment from Social Security, corruption of the electoral process, and budget cuts to essential services. It went on to say that there would be a decline in civil liberties, erosion of free speech, surveillance and control, weaponized legal system, closed borders, reporters being hauled off and arrested for asking tough questions. Here's one. The obsolescence of the Second Amendment, because you don't have night vision fitted armored drones that autonomously swarm.
Wow.
At best, you just have your little AR to give you this false sense of security. I think you're getting the picture here, but some other elements of a broken democracy might include a rise in authoritarianism, personality cults, militarization of government, polarization and violence, economic inequality and collapse, and loss of global influence. You see what I mean when I say we're more than halfway there already? So as I see it, in his second term, Trump, who is anything but status quo, could actually help open the door for a reconstruction of our democracy. Help the pendulum swing towards a government that is inclusive and truly of, by, and for the people. And under the last Reconstruction period in America, let me remind y'all historically who we were and how we, as Black people, showed up. There was widespread voter participation among those who were eligible. Passed by Congress at the end of February 1869 and finally ratified nearly a year later in 1870. The 15th Amendment granted Black men the right to vote, leading to high voter turnout among eligible Black males in the South. In fact, 10 of the 11 former Confederate states, approximately 80% of eligible Black male voters were registered by the summer of 1867. Notice those dates, 80% registered prior to having the constitutional protection to do so. Women did not get the right to vote until the end of that tumultuous time in our country in 1920. Also during Reconstruction, local and federal office holding was at an all-time high level for Black folks. Black men held various positions, including state senators, representatives, city council members, sheriffs, and more, serving in significant numbers at local levels. First Black man was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1870. Hiram Rhodes Revels. This was just 5 years after the end of the Civil War. During this Reconstruction period, about 2,000 Black men served in political office, hundreds held local offices in the South, and more than 600 were elected to state legislatures, and 16 served in Congress. To earn these posts, they often had to win elections plagued by violence and fraud. Southern whites used many forms of intimidation to oppose black voters, politicians, policies, and rights. This advancement in black political participation lasted until about the end of the 19th century. Hey, Jazzy. Of note, most black voters aligned with the Republican Party during Reconstruction, a very different Republican Party, but the Republican Party was that of the party of preference then. American education advanced greatly during Reconstruction as well. The majority of HBCUs were established during this period, although the first HBCU was started in 1837 in Pennsylvania, Cheney University. I'm trying to help y'all out on Jeopardy. There was new information to me too. America also saw some significant challenges and violence during this Reconstruction period. This period in our history gave birth to the Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacy organizations. And despite legal protections, black political participation faced significant resistance from white supremacist groups like the KKK, resulting in violence and intimidation against black politicians. These groups are actually documented with having killed at least 35 black officials. And recently we've heard from some of our elected officials that political violence is never the answer. More hypocrisy and revisionist history. Between 1865 and 1877, thousands of black women, men, children were killed, attacked, sexually assaulted, and terrorized by white mobs and individuals who were shielded from arrest and prosecution. White perpetrators of lawlessness, random violence against formerly enslaved people were almost never held accountable. Instead, they were frequently celebrated, a la Derek Chauvin, Kyle Rittenhouse, Dylan Roof, George Zimmerman. In 2015, the Equal Justice Initiative, that's Brian Stevenson's group, they issued a report that detailed over 4,400 documented racial terror lynchings of black people in America between 1877 and 1950. That's the period after Reconstruction. Let us never forget. During Reconstruction, that 12-year period between 1865 and 77, thousands more were assaulted, raped, or injured in racial terror attacks. The rate of documented racial terror lynchings during Reconstruction is nearly 3 times greater than that during the period reported in that 2015 EJI report. Dozens of mass lynchings took place during Reconstructions in communities across the country in which hundreds of black people were killed. And yet, despite these challenges, these circumstances birthed HBCUs, formalized public education. The Federal Office of Education was established in 1867. And you wonder why he wants to get rid of it? Our Black Greek letter organizations were birthed during this period. 11119. Oh, 6. And 08. The NAACP was founded in 1909. The National Urban League, 1910. Black Wall Street, Black Innovation. So when you look at what we are facing, the potential opportunity to reconstruct a democracy, who better to help rebuild this thing in a more inclusive way? Because we know that this great experiment was put together with the intent to only include white male property owners. And I feel you, my people. I feel that collective sigh. We's tired. I get it. But who else to look out for us and others than us? Listen to me now. We have a track record for it. We have the collective experience for it. And we have the moral compass for it. And yes, I'm speaking in generalizations. However, let me share with you my thinking behind this. In elementary school, I had what was known as a rare experience at the time. My art teacher was a man, whereas most of the educators in the building, short of the administrators, most of those educators were women. My art teacher also happened to be a black man. And to hammer the point home, his name actually was Mr. Black. I distinctly remember learning about the color wheel from Mr. Black, sitting on those cold stools on the East Bank. Roy G. Biv, mixing paints, yellow and blue make green, red and blue make violet. And then when he explained the color black as being inclusive of all colors, black is the sum of all colors, he would sing out to the class of mostly my white peers. Black is the sum of all colors. For me, a light bulb went off. It's unlikely that I put all the pieces together then and there, but the understanding that black embodies the inclusion of all really resonated with me. It generally rings true historically, and till this day, that concept is imbued in my work and my purpose. It's part of my origin story. Black is the inclusion of all colors. So, who better to look out for us than us as we rebuild a broken democracy? Coalition building is absolutely a part of that rebuilding. We must continue to engage with one another in meaningful ways and work the muscles of compromise at the community level. These things will be essential to take our mission from impossible to possible.
Yes.
Mission possible, protecting freedom, justice, and democracy. What does that look like today, next week, within the next few months? First of all, we aren't supposed to be here. By all accounts and efforts throughout the centuries, enslavement, the injustices of sharecropping, the violence of the Reconstruction period, Jim Crow laws, we aren't supposed to be here. Yet here we still are. Beautiful. Beautifully, boldly, after attempts of systemic annihilation and genocide. See, we are already a mission possible.
Yes.
I don't think a mission possible looks like marching on Washington up to the White House with a list of demands. All politics is local. Beyond a focus on that national rhetoric, who is doing who is doing what to who in the White House, I try to remain rooted in the reality that all politics is local. You can have relationships, hold greater accountability to people with whom you have a greater chance of interacting with interpersonally, not just digitally. Your state senator and state assembly member are the only members of this community who can introduce possible new state laws. Do you know them? Do you have a relationship with them? You heard some names: Assembly Member Steve Bennett, Senator Monique Limon, Assembly Member Jackie Irwin.
She came up to me. She said,
Do you know their staff? Does their staff know you?
I did.
I got y'all too. Your county supervisors and members of the city council, school boards, and judges. County supervisors have staff to help extend their reach in the community. Rarely is that the case for city councils and school boards. These people are among us. They are us. We are fortunate in that California is the state that invents the future. The fifth, edging towards the fourth, but after this last round of disasters, I don't know, fifth-ish largest economy in the world. And we have a state government that maintains that. At the top of that dome, of course, is the governor and the legislature. So go beyond asking for certificates, inviting our elected officials to your 1 or 2 events a year. Pay attention beyond election years. Set up meetings with your representatives and their staff. A simple first step. And meetings with an agenda. Here's the problem. Here's how it affects X number of people in your district. And we're looking to you to help come up with a solution. A small remote water district had a problem with their groundwater rights, so they reached out to their local legislators, explaining the problem, highlighted the impact, and helped cook up a solution that is now law. That process is replicated hundreds of times each year throughout this great state. Are you tapped in? I've worked for, with, and alongside some dynamic elected officials and their staffs over the years in this arena locally. Of note, the only black person who was doing this work between LA and the Bay Area. Your local elected leaders generally want to know where their folks are on a variety of issues. I recall many a times those officials that I work for asking that very question. Where are my locals at? And getting diverse perspectives around the table to answer those questions was always an intentional pursuit and effort. Or sometimes like pulling teeth. I still love you, Barry. As stated in his famed Gettysburg Address, Abraham Lincoln said, "A government of the people, by the people, for the people." And without judgment, do you think that's what we have today? Are you the people? Of, by, and for. What might that look like? Well, some basic legislative advocacy could look like get to know your legislator. Individually, go out and meet with them. The groups you're associated with, make sure they know who you're connected with. Correspond with your legislator. Be brief and to the point. Be courteous and reasonable. Have a basic understanding of the legislative process. There are multiple hearings when something is introduced. I'm just a bill. That's still the process. If you don't know what I'm talking about, young folks, go ahead and YouTube It's Just a Bill, Schoolhouse Rock.
That was good.
Find out about issues or legislation that's important to you. Tap into the newspaper, organizations, or newsletters. Lobby in person. Set up a meeting. That's what they're there for. And if you make trips to Sacramento, testify on the bill. And I say it that way because there's rarely a budget to send folks from the District of Sacramento to testify on the bill. But a government of, by, and for the people. The last day to submit a bill request to the Office of Legislative Counsel is January 24th. That means that legislators have to at least be cooking up an idea by Friday of this week. If you haven't been in communication with your elected officials on these issues, you're already behind the ball. Not too late to start meeting with them and forging real relationships. And look, I get it. By no means am I suggesting that legislative advocacy is going to solve all of our problems. But laws, lawfulness, and lawlessness has been the name of the game. And just as Dr. King penned it to his fellow clergymen in his letter from a Birmingham jail on April 16, 1963, that was just about 5 years before he would be assassinated. Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. That's our compass. This is not the time for status quo. The time to protect and defend is over. Now is the time to Get up, stand up. Be 10 toes down for the cause of justice and equity. Be offensive, not defensive. Let us be strategic and intentional about tangling the tentacles of justice around those most in need and the most vulnerable. Know the rules of the game so that you can bend them and operate in the gray areas, but with integrity and a commitment to justice and equity, until we all have equality. I appreciate the opportunity to share this ancestrally informed message with my community. Thank you for your time, your ears, your attention, and your hearts. If y'all got questions, comments, or want to debate, I'm going to be at the Alpha Phi Alpha table on the other side. My brother's got our back. I appreciate you.